You step into the dust-choked streets of Alexandria, and the sun spills across the sandstone like molten gold. The air hums with voices of traders, philosophers, and scribes, the marketplace alive with the scent of spices and the chatter of distant tongues. But your gaze drifts higher, past the bustling agora, toward the grand library of Alexandria, that fabled temple of knowledge where scrolls stack against eternity itself. Here a woman, your guide, your unseen companion, walks silently through corridors lined with wisdom. Her name is Hypatia. You will remember it only because you are listening closely, because in the world she lived, memory was a scarce currency, hoarded and allocated by men who would later erase her name from the annals of history. She moves with quiet authority, robes swaying, a stylus tucked behind one ear. You watch her lecture, and the room seems to bend around her intellect. Men and women alike are drawn into her orbit, but history, as it is written, will minimize the gravity of her orbit, reducing it to mere footnotes or dismissing her entirely as a remarkable but unfortunate anomaly. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the deliberate invisibility that time itself imposes on those it seeks to silence. Hypatia's fingers trace the curves of geometrical diagrams, drawing circles that attempt to contain infinity, lines that stretch beyond imagination, and yet her own life will be violently contained by the politics and misogyny of her era. She speaks of conic sections and celestial spheres, of the orbits of planets that dance with a precision only she seems to grasp fully. You want to ask her how it feels to be both revered and vulnerable, to be a beacon in a world teetering on the edge of darkness. But the past does not allow questions. It allows only observation, only immersion. You follow her from lecture hall to workshop, where instruments of astronomy, astrolabes, armillary spheres, catch the sunlight and cast intricate shadows on the walls. Hypatia manipulates these tools with the deftness of a master, calculating eclipses and tracking the paths of the stars. Her students marvel, scribbling furiously in parchment-bound notebooks that will later vanish into private collections or be destroyed in the fires of conquest. And yet, as you watch, a chill creeps through the air, a sense of the impermanence of all she has built. The libraries she loves are politically vulnerable, the philosophers she debates are divided by religious tensions, and the city itself is a powder keg of zealotry waiting to ignite. It is not enough, you realize, to admire her brilliance. You feel her presence as a warning. Knowledge, even when it is extraordinary, is fragile when the world refuses to acknowledge its creator. The power of a woman like Hypatia, wielded with intellect and grace, terrifies the custodians of tradition. You sense why later chroniclers, those men who wrote the histories that survived, will choose to render her violent death as scandal rather than martyrdom, as an anecdote of civic unrest rather than a testament to her genius. And yet, despite the forces arrayed against her, she persists. You walk beside her through the streets, past the temples and the markets, and you see the eyes that follow her, some curious, some reverent, some suspicious. You hear whispers, a woman teaching men, a woman deciphering the secrets of the cosmos. Such things are unheard of, unnatural in the minds of those who would ultimately erase her. But you see her resilience, and for a moment you are allowed to feel hope. Hope that memory can be preserved even when history conspires to obliterate it. Her life is a tapestry of intellect and peril. She navigates the treacherous waters of political intrigue with the careful precision of her geometric diagrams. One misstep, one misinterpreted action could unravel everything. And indeed, it does. You witness the mob that storms the streets, the chaos that descends upon her lecture halls, the weapons and torches that become instruments of erasure. And yet, even in the horror of that moment, she does not shrink from her identity. She stands unflinching, a testament to the courage it takes to exist fully in a world that would deny you. As you linger in the memory of her final hours, You are confronted with the cruel paradox. Hypatia's death is meant to erase her, to make her an object lesson in the dangers of female intellect. But you feel the quiet rebellion in the air, the way her ideas ripple outward through the students who survived, through the fragments of writings that endured, through your own ability to hear her story now. She becomes more than a name on a page. She becomes a force, intangible yet undeniable, a reminder that history is never a complete erasure, not if someone remembers. You step away from Alexandria, leaving behind the scent of incense and the echo of quills scratching against parchment. And yet, you carry her with you. You carry the knowledge that extraordinary women have always existed on the edges, in the margins, in the shadows, and that their brilliance can survive only if you pay attention. Hypatia is your first guide, the first proof that history's omissions are deliberate but not absolute. You are now awake to the patterns, to the erasures that will follow through time, and to the quiet determination it takes to recover voices buried under centuries of indifference. By the time you look back, the sun has shifted. Alexandria seems both larger and smaller at once, the weight of the past pressing against your chest. You realize that what you have witnessed is not only the story of one woman, but the beginning of a long journey through obscured lives. Mathematicians, scientists, warriors, rulers, healers, and rebels whose names have been hidden, whose deeds have been minimized, whose memory has been stretched thin across the pages of male-dominated history. Hypatia's life is a lens through which you will see the world differently, a lens that sharpens as you continue walking, listening, remembering. And so you move forward, stepping out of the sunlit streets into the endless corridors of history, guided by the unyielding presence of those who refuse to vanish completely. Hypatia is the first, but not the last. You follow the echo of Hypatia's footsteps into another time, another city, the streets now cobbled and narrow, lined with the ochre and terracotta facades of Cremona. The air smells faintly of oil paint and drying plaster, and you hear the scratch of brushes against canvas, the soft murmurs of students huddled around a master. Here lives another extraordinary woman, one whose genius has been quietly folded into the footnotes of European art history. Sophonisba Anguissola. You see her in her studio, lit by a single window that casts a long, golden beam across the room. She crouches over a self-portrait, painting not just a likeness but an entire assertion of presence and intellect. Her gaze is calm but sharp, aware that the very act of painting as a woman in this era is both radical and dangerous. You feel her tension, the constant negotiation between creativity and the restrictions imposed by gender, a delicate balance that could tip at any moment. You step closer and notice the meticulous detail in the folds of her sleeves, the subtle play of light on the delicate contours of a face, the way her brush captures personality with an intimacy that rivals any male master of her time. And yet, outside these walls, her talent will be reframed, diminished, or simply absorbed into the broader canon of male artists. Names like Titian or Michelangelo will tower in memory, while hers drifts quietly toward obscurity, preserved only in the rare documents and the fragments of letters that survive the passage of centuries. You follow her as she instructs her pupils, guiding their hands, correcting angles, demonstrating perspective with the same meticulous attention she gives her own work. Her lessons are subtle revolutions, small acts of defiance in a society that teaches women to be ornamental rather than intellectual. Every brushstroke she paints, every word she utters becomes a thread in a larger tapestry of resistance, a reminder that artistry is a form of assertion, and assertion is power. Outside the studio, the city hums with the clatter of carts, the laughter of children, and the conversations of merchants. You notice the tension in the air. Cremona is under the sway of social expectations that tighten around women like chains. Anguissola's male contemporaries receive commissions with ease. Her commissions are few and scrutinized. When she finally travels to the court of Philip II of Spain, the queen herself receives her as a prodigy, a marvel whose abilities astonish yet subtly unsettle those around her. You feel her discomfort at the court's rigid formalities, the way she must navigate politics and expectation with the same precision she uses to place a shadow or a highlight on canvas. And yet, she perseveres. You sense her quiet determination, her understanding that survival and legacy are intertwined. Every portrait of a noble child or a court official is more than decoration. It is proof of capability, a subtle reassertion of her existence in a world poised to erase women from memory. You see her signature on a letter, tiny and unassuming, yet it asserts a presence that the centuries have tried to minimize. Her influence spreads quietly, through apprentices who will carry her techniques forward, through the nobles who remember her skill, and through the very structure of Renaissance painting itself, which she reshaped even as history attempted to forget her. You linger in her studio as evening falls, light dimming across her palettes and jars of pigment. Her life feels precarious, balanced between recognition and erasure. And yet, she does not shrink. There is a dignity in her work, an assertion of existence that whispers louder than the silencing force of historical neglect. You understand that her story is a bridge between eras, connecting the mathematical rigor of Hypatia to the artistic subversion of a woman who dared to paint as if the world belonged to her, even when it would later pretend she did not. You feel the weight of centuries pressing on Anguissola, the way her reputation was absorbed into collective memory only to be partially reclaimed in the modern era. Museums, once silent, now whisper fragments of her brilliance. Books, once dismissive, now cautiously acknowledge her contributions. And yet the erasure is still evident. How many millions have seen her work without knowing her name? How many countless women artists have followed, their stories swallowed before they could take root? You sense that Anguissola's survival in memory is as much a testament to your own attentiveness as to her talent. As you step into the courtyard outside her studio, the sun low and amber, you notice the shadows stretching long across the cobblestones. You realize that history has a rhythm, a pattern of spotlight and shadow, of visibility and erasure. Hypatia and Sophonisba are points on this pattern, beacons that shine briefly before the world attempts to dim them. But you are here, following these threads, tracing the connections, feeling the pulse of courage that flows through women across time who refuse to vanish. And then you hear the laughter of Anguissola's students, a sound that rises like music from the dusty streets. You see her smile at their clumsy strokes, at their tentative attempts to capture the world on canvas. In that moment, you understand that teaching, mentoring, passing knowledge forward, these are also acts of defiance. Though the world may forget, the lineage of skill, the imprint of influence, persists in ways history struggles to erase. You leave Cremona with the echoes of brushstrokes in your mind, stepping out into the dusk, carrying her quiet rebellion with you. Her life, like Hypatia's, is a whisper against the roar of erasure, a reminder that extraordinary women exist in the margins of history not because they are minor, but because the world has chosen to ignore them. You feel a growing sense of purpose, a connection across time, as though the threads of their lives are weaving into your own awareness, strengthening your resolve to remember, to bear witness, to trace the hidden architecture of women who shaped history in silence. And so you continue, the streets behind you fading into memory, stepping toward the next story, the next life deliberately obscured, the next force of brilliance denied full acknowledgement. Sophonisba's shadows cling to your awareness, guiding you toward the next figure, another erased architect of her time. You realize that these are not isolated stories but a continuous current, a secret river of courage, intellect, and artistry flowing beneath the surface of recorded history. You leave the echo of paint and parchment behind and journey eastward, across deserts where the wind carries the heat like liquid fire and the sand shifts endlessly beneath your feet. The city rises before you in the distance, a jewel of stone and sun, Palmyra. Its columns stretch skyward, temples and colonnades shimmering with the dust of centuries, and you know that within these walls lived a woman whose name once commanded armies and nations alike. Zenobia, queen and warrior, will guide your steps now. She stands on the balcony of her palace, robes flowing in the desert breeze, gazing out over a city that hums with commerce and culture. Palmyra is a crossroads of empire, a nexus where Roman trade routes intersect with the Silk Road, and Zenobia holds it all in her mind like a masterful chessboard. You sense her intellect and ambition, her awareness that power is as much a game of perception as it is of force. Men who sought to dominate the region underestimate her at their peril, and yet history will reduce her to legend, to myth, to a cautionary tale of hubris, erasing the sharpness of her strategic genius. You follow her into the council chambers, where generals and advisors bow, hesitant to speak without her prompting. She moves among them with grace and authority, listening carefully, questioning thoroughly, making decisions that are both bold and measured. Her strategies are written in whispers and fragmentary chronicles, her victories celebrated briefly, then absorbed into the triumphs of Rome's expansionist narrative. You feel the frustration in knowing that her brilliance will be remembered more as anecdote than fact, more as curiosity than as the deliberate mastery it truly was. The armies under her command are disciplined and loyal, an extension of her own mind and will. You watch her overseeing maneuvers, pointing to formations, predicting enemy movements as though the desert itself reveals secrets only she can interpret. You sense that Zenobia understands the fragility of her position. Palmyra sits between mighty empires, and her power is both real and precarious. One misstep, one betrayal, and all that she has built could crumble. You feel the tension coiled like a spring, the constant awareness that her survival and her memory depend on more than skill alone. They depend on how history will choose to remember her. You see her confronting Roman envoys, her voice calm yet unyielding, negotiating terms with the poise of someone who knows that diplomacy is a battlefield in itself. Her presence is formidable, her intelligence intimidating, and yet she faces prejudice simply because she is a woman. You realize that every recorded victory will eventually be reframed by later historians, her triumphs attributed to luck, circumstance, or the men around her. The corridors of time conspire to shrink her from a queen commanding armies to a footnote in the annals of Rome, a figure admired for beauty but not intellect. And still, she persists. You follow her campaigns, her expansion of Palmyra's influence into Egypt and Anatolia, her deft maneuvering between allegiances and enemies. She is not only a strategist but also a patron of culture, a preserver of knowledge, a ruler whose city thrives on trade, philosophy, and art. You sense her understanding that power is never solely military. It is social, economic, cultural, and intellectual. Her vision is holistic, yet history will remember only fragments. The drama of her defeat, the spectacle of her capture, the fleeting image of her bound in chains paraded before Rome. You linger at that moment of fall, the cruelty of erasure pressing down. You see the indignity forced upon her, the attempt to reduce her existence to spectacle, to turn a sovereign into a story for the amusement of others. And yet, you feel the subtle rebellion that endures, the echo of her influence in the city she fortified, in the trade networks she expanded, in the cultural flourishing she fostered. Zenobia's intellect and vision survive not in the glory claimed by conquerors, but in the resilience of what she shaped, in the whispers of a story waiting for someone to hear it fully. As you walk through the ruins of Palmyra, columns broken but still upright, mosaics cracked but still gleaming in the sunlight, You feel her presence in the enduring architecture, in the careful planning of streets and public spaces, in the echoes of governance that persisted long after her capture. History may attempt to reduce her to legend, to anecdote, to myth, but you know the truth. She was a commander, a ruler, a visionary whose intellect was deliberately obscured by those who would never let a woman's power be celebrated unfiltered. You feel a connection forming across time, the recognition that Zenobia's story is neither isolated nor complete. She links Hypatia's intellect to Sophonisba's artistry, forming a continuum of women whose brilliance was feared, ignored, or rewritten. You understand that every city, every palace, every classroom, every canvas can harbor the presence of women who defied erasure, even when history conspires to forget. And then you step into the desert wind again, the sun dipping low, painting Palmyra in shades of amber and shadow. You carry with you the weight of a queen's courage, the quiet defiance of a mind that navigated empire with precision and vision. Zenobia is both lesson and warning. Greatness, when wielded by women, is always vulnerable to obliteration by those who refuse to acknowledge it. Yet her legacy persists, in ways subtle and enduring, in whispers across the sands, in the structures she built, in the unrecorded influence she exerted over generations. You move on, tracing the hidden currents of history, following the paths of women whose achievements are minimized or erased. Zenobia's presence guides you, a reminder that brilliance can be both a beacon and a target, that leadership can be both celebrated and concealed, and that memory itself is a battlefield where courage, intellect, and resilience wage war against forgetfulness. And so you step forward into the next chapter, carrying the echoes of a queen whose armies once commanded empires, whose intellect shaped cities, whose name history tried to bind in chains. Zenobia is not the last, and you know the journey continues, the continuum of extraordinary women stretching into every corner of the past, waiting for someone to witness them fully, to carry them into memory, to resist the erasures that time insists upon. You leave the golden sands of Palmyra behind, stepping across seas now, the salt tang heavy on your tongue, the horizon stretching endlessly in pale blue and silver. Your feet press against the deck of a creaking ship, timbers groaning under the weight of centuries of exploration, of ambition and discovery. A new figure appears on the horizon of your consciousness. Jean Barrett, the first woman known to have circumnavigated the globe, whose name is quietly tucked into the logs of men, barely acknowledged, almost erased entirely. You see her disguised as a man, her wide-brimmed hat pulled low, her clothes ill-fitting but sufficient. She moves among sailors, assistants, and naturalists, carrying her instruments, her specimens, her keen eye for observation. She measures, sketches, and catalogues the flora and fauna of lands that most Europeans will never see. Every step is an act of courage. Discovery is dangerous, and her identity, if revealed, could threaten her safety and her very ability to participate in the voyage. You feel the tension coiled in her every movement, the careful balance she maintains between being present and remaining invisible. Her mind is a catalogue of wonder. You follow her into jungles dense with unfamiliar sounds, where orchids bloom like flames in the shadows, where leaves drip with rain and insects hum in patterns that seem deliberate, intentional. Jean records everything meticulously, her hand steady, her gaze unwavering. The world she documents is breathtaking in its variety and complexity, but you sense the bittersweet irony. Centuries from now, men's names will dominate the maps and journals, while hers will appear as a footnote, a whispered acknowledgement of contribution disguised in anonymity. You accompany her as she navigates social hierarchies aboard the ship, the suspicion and amusement of sailors who cannot know the truth. She learns the art of adaptation, of negotiation, of quiet persistence, recognizing that to survive in male-dominated spaces requires intellect as much as courage. You notice how she documents the plants, sketching their forms, noting their uses, and preparing detailed descriptions that will later form the backbone of botanical understanding. And yet she will often be omitted from formal accounts, her labor credited to her male companions, her discoveries absorbed into collective knowledge without acknowledgement. Her journey is not just geographic, it is social, political, and psychological. You see her confront illness, the perils of storms, the distrust of those who assume women cannot endure the hardships of a global expedition. You feel the resilience in her heartbeat, the stubborn refusal to let her gender define her capacity. She walks through ports of trade and conquest, introducing herself cautiously, observing keenly, learning the subtleties of culture, commerce, and survival. And still, she is largely invisible, a shadow in the historical record, her name slipping past the ink of official journals. You walk with her through islands where spices grow wild, where animals unknown to Europe roam freely, where rivers twist like silver snakes through forests untouched by commerce. She records everything, annotates every sketch, arranges specimens with care, preparing for the moment when her work will be recognized, though you know that recognition will be partial at best. History is seldom kind to women who step outside prescribed roles, and Jean Barrett's genius is a testament to the quiet labor of erasure. You feel the weight of her loneliness, the constant need for vigilance, the private pride in her accomplishments tempered by the knowledge that the world may never fully acknowledge them. And yet she persists. Her determination becomes almost tangible, a force that presses forward despite every obstacle, every dismissal, every invisible boundary erected by centuries of prejudice. She charts a course not only across oceans, but across the rigid limits imposed upon women of her time. By the time the voyage nears its end, the seas calm and the sun low, Jean steps onto familiar shores, triumphant in her survival and her discoveries, yet aware of the erasure that awaits her in the official histories. You sense her mixed emotions, pride, relief, frustration, and the quiet indignation of a life spent in obscurity despite unparalleled achievement. The specimens she collected, the plants she documented, the observations she recorded, they will survive, whispering her contributions to future generations, even as her name remains marginal, almost forgotten. You linger on that shore with her, feeling the paradox of accomplishment shadowed by invisibility. Her story resonates because it reflects a recurring pattern. Brilliance, courage, and skill are not sufficient to secure recognition when the world is predisposed to ignore those who do not fit the expected mold. You feel the continuity with Hypatia, Sophonisba, and Zenobia, a line of women whose intellect and audacity are acknowledged only reluctantly, if at all, by the historical record. As you step back from the shore, you sense the tide of history itself pressing against you, attempting to erode these narratives, to smooth them into the conventional, forgettable forms sanctioned by patriarchy. And yet, you feel the persistence of memory in your own awareness. You carry Jean Barrett with you, her courage a current that runs beneath the more visible waves of exploration and conquest. A reminder that every overlooked contribution still has weight, still shapes the contours of the world in ways often unseen. You leave the ocean behind, stepping onto streets paved with time rather than stone, carrying with you the image of a woman who circled the globe in disguise, who cataloged life in forms both scientific and artistic, who endured danger and prejudice to leave a legacy that whispers rather than shouts. You understand that your own role, your own attentiveness, becomes part of this legacy. Remembering her is an act of resistance, a refusal to allow history to complete its erasures. And so you move forward once more, the horizon of the past stretching infinitely, guiding you to the next extraordinary woman, the next life shaped by courage and intellect, and yet deliberately obscured. Jean Barrett is both waypoint and compass, a reminder that exploration is as much about survival and recognition as it is about discovery. Her footsteps echo beside yours, silent yet insistent, carrying you toward the next story that demands to be heard. You step away from the scent of salt and tropical foliage, leaving Jean Barrett's circumnavigation behind, and find yourself in the narrow, gaslit streets of late 19th century London. The fog curls around the lamplights like whispers of secrets, and the air smells faintly of coal smoke and oil. Here, in a society that prizes invention yet refuses it fully to women, you encounter Hertha Marks Ayrton, a mind whose brilliance would illuminate the fields of science and engineering, but whose recognition would be systematically deferred. You find her in a cluttered laboratory, a room thick with the scent of copper, oil, and chemicals. Tools and instruments clutter every surface, a chaos of creativity, each piece meticulously arranged according to a mind that understands both the mechanics and the mathematics of the world. Ayrton leans over her apparatus, adjusting wires and plates, watching sparks leap with precision. She is conducting experiments on electric arcs and ripples in sand, exploring the physics of phenomena that no one yet fully understands, and yet the world is prepared to ignore her genius. You follow her hands as they manipulate dials and switches, each movement deliberate, exacting. You feel the quiet intensity of a woman fully immersed in intellect, her mind a lattice of curiosity and calculation. She has submitted papers to scientific societies, attended lectures, presented her findings, and still her gender bars her from full recognition. You see the frustration in her eyes, the subtle indignation she carries like a hidden flame, and you sense the resilience that drives her to continue despite the obstacles. Her work with electric arcs, an effort to understand the flickering sparks that dance between wires, might have secured her immediate acclaim, yet she faces a society unwilling to accept a woman as an equal thinker. Men of the Royal Society view her experiments as curiosities, commendable but ultimately secondary, while her innovations, including the Ayrton fan designed to ventilate poisonous gases in factories, are celebrated only indirectly, credited in name or patent to others. You feel the tension between the tangible brilliance of her work and the intangible erasure imposed by social expectation. You walk with her through lecture halls where she presents findings, her voice calm yet commanding, her diagrams crisp on the chalkboard, her explanations precise. Students and colleagues listen in awe, some openly admiring, others reluctantly respectful, but the walls of recognition are still too high. Her name is noted but never heralded, her discoveries recorded but never fully celebrated. You sense that Ayrton understands this invisibility as a condition of her era, and yet refuses to let it define her existence. Every experiment, every lecture, every published paper is an assertion of presence, a resistance to historical marginalization. You observe her in private moments, sketching diagrams of waveforms in sand trays, testing hypotheses about light polarization, developing theories that will later influence major breakthroughs in physics. Her intellect is meticulous, expansive, and unyielding, yet the historical record is reluctant to inscribe her in the same breath as her male contemporaries. You feel the quiet injustice of a world capable of marveling at her discoveries, but unwilling to grant her the recognition that her work commands. Outside the laboratory, London hums with innovation and ambition, yet Ayrton navigates the streets like a shadow among men who claim science as their domain. She attends conferences, debates theories, publishes prolifically, and mentors younger women, leaving traces of knowledge in ways both visible and subtle. And still, history, with its selective memory, will present her as an anomaly rather than as a central force, as an exception rather than a standard, and you feel the weight of this erasure pressing against the very air you breathe. Her resilience is evident not just in her work, but in her navigation of societal expectation. You sense the quiet defiance in every move, the understanding that recognition may be partial, delayed, or denied, yet the value of her contributions remains immutable. You feel her persistence, her refusal to shrink, her insistence that intellect is not a property defined by gender. Her presence radiates a lesson. The fight for acknowledgement is itself a form of invention, a crafting of legacy in opposition to the currents of historical neglect. You linger in the glow of her laboratory lamps, noting the meticulous sketches of circuits, the stacks of journals, the careful arrangements of her experimental apparatus. Ayrton's work is not only groundbreaking in physics and engineering, but also in asserting that women can and do occupy spaces of intellectual authority. You realize that every spark she studies, every arc she measures, every ripple she observes is both a scientific insight and a subtle act of rebellion against the historical norms that sought to erase her. As the night deepens, you step out onto fog-laden streets, carrying with you the presence of a woman who illuminated darkness in both literal and metaphorical senses. You sense the lineage of courage connecting her to Hypatia, Sophonisba, Zenobia, and Jean Barrett, women whose intellect, artistry, leadership, and exploration have been repeatedly obscured, yet whose influence persists in forms that refuse total obliteration. Ayrton's story is a testament to endurance, to persistence, to the quiet insistence that genius cannot be contained by societal limitations. You move forward, leaving the flickering lamps behind, and feel the current of memory guiding you toward the next extraordinary woman, the next life shaped by brilliance and resilience, whose story has been deliberately pushed into the margins. Hertha marks Ayrton as both beacon and compass, a reminder that intellectual courage demands resistance against the erasures of history, and that every forgotten woman carries a light capable of piercing the darkness if only someone is willing to see it. And so you continue your journey, each step leading you deeper into the hidden corridors of history, tracing the lives of extraordinary women whose contributions were minimized, rewritten, or denied, yet whose spirits remain indelible in the fabric of time. You sense that the pattern is repeating, a continuum of brilliance, courage, and resistance stretching across centuries, waiting for you to witness, remember, and carry it forward. You leave the gaslit streets of London behind, the scent of coal fading into the crisp air of the Yorkshire moors. The wind carries whispers of heather and stone, and you feel the pulse of lives lived in quiet rebellion against convention. Here, amid the rolling hills and isolated farmhouses, you encounter Anne Lister, a woman whose intelligence, ambition, and meticulous record-keeping would be obscured for centuries by the very society she navigated with ingenuity and courage. You find her in Shibden Hall, surrounded by leather-bound journals stacked to the ceiling, quills poised over ink pots, maps and diagrams spread across the table like a constellation of private knowledge. She writes with precision, documenting not only her daily life but her thoughts, ambitions, and desires in painstaking detail. You watch her hand move swiftly across the pages, recording commerce, estate management, travel plans, and personal reflections with a candor that is both intimate and revolutionary. Her journals are a labyrinth of intellect and identity, a secret chronicle of a woman living boldly within and against the confines of her time. Lister is more than a diarist. She is an astute observer of society, an analytical mind dissecting commerce, law, and land management. You follow her as she negotiates leases, supervises renovations, and orchestrates the operations of Shibden Hall with the precision of a general mapping terrain. Every decision is strategic, every plan meticulously calculated, yet the world around her is primed to diminish the significance of her authority simply because it emanates from a woman. You feel the tension in her life, the constant balancing act between asserting agency and remaining acceptable to societal norms. And yet she refuses to hide. Her journals are coded at times, particularly regarding her relationships with other women, preserving intimate truths in the face of potential censure. You sense the courage it takes to exist fully, to document her own desires in a society that would brand them as scandalous, if not criminal. Every entry is both defiance and preservation, a claim to selfhood, a refusal to vanish silently into the historical shadows. You walk with her across the moors, the wind tugging at her coat and her hair, feeling the isolation that mirrors her social marginalization. Lister's world is one of dualities: private brilliance and public scrutiny, intellect and societal limitation, desire and secrecy. Yet in the careful arrangement of her journals, the sharpness of her observations, the exacting management of her estate, you sense a mastery of life itself, a refusal to be confined by the narrow roles assigned to women of her class and era. Her relationships, her explorations, her ventures into business and travel, they are all threads in a tapestry deliberately ignored or misrepresented by later historians. You feel the injustice of her erasure, a woman who lived openly, courageously, and innovatively, whose contributions to social, economic, and cultural life were quietly sidelined. And yet, the journals themselves, hidden away for centuries, hold the truth like buried treasure, waiting for someone to unearth the complexity and magnitude of her existence. You sit with her in the dim glow of candlelight as she plans a journey to Europe, charting routes through France, Switzerland, and Italy. Her mind traces maps and itineraries with the precision of a navigator, considering terrain, commerce, and the subtleties of social reception. Each journey is an act of independence, a challenge to societal expectations, a demonstration of agency in a world that would prefer women to be stationary, ornamental, and silent. You feel the thrill and danger in these travels, the tension between autonomy and exposure, and the quiet satisfaction in her mastery of both. Anne Lister's writing is relentless, a testament to the power of documentation as resistance. She records accounts of estate management with the same care as her personal thoughts, demonstrating that intellect and authority are not limited to public spheres dominated by men. You see her calculations, her assessments of risk and opportunity, her meticulous attention to detail as both practical and revolutionary. And yet, the broader world will suppress this brilliance, framing her life as eccentricity or scandal rather than recognizing the scope of her achievement. You linger over a journal entry with her, seeing how she negotiates identity and society simultaneously, how she captures the texture of her own mind while navigating an era that seeks to erase the complexity of women who defy expectations. You feel the continuum: Hypatia's intellect, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's courage, Ayrton's scientific genius, all reflected here in the analytical precision, courage, and self-determination of Anne Lister. As night falls across the moors, you step outside with her, the stars clear and infinite above. There is a sense of permanence in her impermanence. The journals may remain hidden, the recognition delayed, yet the act of recording, the refusal to vanish quietly, ensures a trace of existence indelible in time. You understand that memory is a battlefield, that historical erasure is not absolute, and that preservation requires both courage and witness. You leave Shibden Hall, the scent of ink and parchment lingering in your senses, carrying the presence of a woman who chronicled her life with unflinching honesty, whose intellect and audacity shaped her world even when it was ignored by those who would write history without her. Anne Lister is both map and compass, guiding you toward the next extraordinary woman, the next story suppressed, the next legacy waiting to be reclaimed. And so you continue, stepping lightly across centuries, tracing the hidden currents of influence, courage, and innovation that link the extraordinary women you have encountered. Her life, like those of the women before her, asserts the truth that brilliance persists even under systematic erasure, and that every act of witnessing, every moment of remembrance, strengthens the continuum of recognition that history tries to deny. You leave the windswept moors of Yorkshire behind and find yourself across the Atlantic, stepping into the uneven streets of 18th century Boston. The smell of smoke and cobblestone, of bread baking and tar from the harbor, fills the air. Amid the bustle, you encounter a small, slight figure seated with a quill in hand, paper spread before her like a stage waiting for performance. Phyllis Wheatley, born into bondage, yet a poet whose mind surpasses the constraints imposed by chains, becomes your guide now. You watch her ink flow across the page, delicate, deliberate, carrying thoughts and feelings with a precision that belies her youth. Each word is an act of defiance, a reclaiming of voice in a society determined to render her invisible. She has learned the classics, the Bible, the languages of European scholarship, not because she was encouraged, but because she pursued knowledge with a hunger that defied circumstance. You feel the tension in her life, intellect restrained by societal chains, genius confined by prejudice, yet her mind remains unbound. Her poetry is a mirror of both her environment and her resilience. You follow her as she navigates the intellectual circles of Boston, her verses read aloud in parlors and salons, met with astonishment and admiration, but always filtered through disbelief that a black woman, enslaved and young, could produce such refined art. The applause is hesitant, constrained by social norms, yet every syllable she writes asserts existence, humanity, and intellect. You sit beside her in quiet moments, reading lines that intertwine personal reflection with classical allusions, revealing a mind both well-educated and deeply introspective. Her poetry is not only literary achievement but resistance. It challenges the very assumptions of a society built on suppression. And yet, you feel the injustice pressing upon her. Publishers and scholars acknowledge her work, but always with qualifiers, always with doubt, always with the implicit suggestion that such accomplishment is an anomaly. Her journey to publication is arduous, requiring letters of recommendation, proof of ability, and endorsements from men who mediate between her and the broader world. You feel her resilience in every stroke of her quill, her refusal to be diminished by the necessity of intermediaries. Wheatley becomes a master of both art and survival, negotiating the narrow spaces allowed to her while asserting authority over her intellectual output. You witness the inner tension she must endure, the constant awareness of how easily history could erase her. She is a poet in a world that does not recognize black voices, a woman whose genius is constrained by the prejudices of race and gender alike. Yet you see her courage, the quiet insistence that intellect and creativity can flourish even under oppression. Each poem becomes a testament not just to her skill, but to her survival, a signal across centuries that extraordinary women have always existed, even when systematically ignored. As she matures, you feel her ambition stretching beyond the limits imposed on her. She writes to figures of authority, seeks connections with abolitionists and intellectuals, and navigates the precarious space between acknowledgement and invisibility. Her poetry circulates in pamphlets and journals, influencing others while her personal story is at risk of being forgotten. You sense the bittersweet triumph of her existence. The impact is real, profound, yet always partially occluded by the very structures she defies. Walking with her along Boston's harbor, the wind carrying the cries of gulls and the scent of the sea, you feel the paradox of visibility. Wheatley is celebrated and yet marginalized, acclaimed for talent while denied full recognition of personhood. She writes with a consciousness of history's indifference, her quill both a tool of creation and a weapon against erasure. You realize that her work is a bridge between those who would dominate memory and those who quietly insist on preserving their own truths. You linger on a poem about freedom and divine providence, noting the layers of meaning, the subtle rebellion, the careful construction of a voice that demands to be heard. You feel the echo of Hypatia, Sophonisba, Zenobia, Jean Barrett, Ayrton, and Anne Lister in Wheatley's perseverance. Women who create, lead, explore, invent, or record, and who resist being silenced. Every act of literary production, every calculation, every brushstroke or strategy is a thread in the same tapestry of courage and intellect that history tries to trim from view. As night falls over Boston, the streets quiet and the harbor calm, you step away from her presence, carrying the memory of a poet who wrote against impossible odds. Her verses linger like ghosts, audible in your mind, guiding you toward the next extraordinary woman, the next erased life whose brilliance insists on being remembered. Phyllis Wheatley is a reminder that intellect and creativity can survive oppression, that the act of creation itself is defiance, and that every recovered story strengthens the continuum of memory that history would suppress. And so you move forward, leaving Boston's cobblestones behind, tracing the hidden currents of intellect, courage, and resilience, carrying the whispers of women who refuse to vanish. Wheatley's poetry becomes part of the rhythm guiding your journey, a signal that even in erasure, extraordinary women continue to shape the world in ways both subtle and profound, and that your witnessing is an essential act of preservation. You leave the winds of Boston behind, crossing the Atlantic once more, this time to the cobbled streets and gas-lit halls of early 19th century London. The city smells of coal smoke, polished wood, and ink from freshly printed pamphlets. Amid the bustle of carriages and the hum of conversation, you encounter Ada Lovelace, the woman who glimpsed the future of computation before the world even had a name for it. Her brilliance will eventually be recognized, but only long after the era that constrained her, a casualty of gendered erasure that you feel pressing like a weight in the air around her. You see her bent over diagrams, quills scratching across paper, pencils marking notes in margins, calculations sprawling across pages with the precision of a mathematician and the imagination of a poet. Ada is translating and expanding the work of Charles Babbage's analytical engine, recognizing in its cogs and wheels a possibility far beyond arithmetic, a machine capable of performing sequences that, in theory, could generate anything from music to art. You feel the energy of a mind stretching across dimensions that few can perceive, perceiving patterns, possibilities, and principles invisible to everyone else. You step closer, sensing the challenge she faces. Ada is a woman of intellect in a society that assumes women are incapable of serious scientific thought. Conversations with peers are often polite but dismissive, patronizing, or outright incredulous. Yet she persists, her mind sharp, her logic precise, her imagination boundless. You feel the tension in her work. Every calculation, every annotation is an act of defiance against a world structured to ignore her capabilities. Her writing is meticulous, expansive, and infused with a visionary insight. She understands that computation could extend beyond numbers, that the engine she studies could become a tool for creating patterns, expressing ideas, and producing sequences that reflect human creativity. You sense her excitement, the thrill of anticipation, and the frustration that the recognition of her genius is filtered through male contemporaries. History will acknowledge Babbage as the inventor, while her foresight remains obscure for over a century. You follow her through conversations with mathematicians, engineers, and aristocrats, witnessing both admiration and condescension. Ada navigates social hierarchies with the same precision she applies to formulas, aware that her gender imposes limitations even as her intellect exceeds the constraints of her time. You feel her quiet determination to assert herself through the elegance of her logic and the clarity of her prose, ensuring that her voice, even when marginalized, leaves a trace. You watch as she annotates a set of computational notes, describing processes in a way that reveals not just an understanding of mechanics, but a conceptual leap that prefigures modern computing. You feel the weight of this realization, a woman envisioning a digital future more than a century before it arrives, yet likely to be minimized in her own time. Every formula she writes, every footnote she crafts, becomes both a scientific insight and a testament to intellectual courage. Ada moves beyond mathematics into philosophy, contemplating the implications of machines and logic for creativity and cognition. You sense her awareness of the paradox she inhabits, a visionary whose contributions are invisible, whose genius is filtered through the expectations of a society that values women primarily as muses or ornaments. And yet, she persists, refusing to let limitations define her. Her imagination becomes a bridge between what exists and what could be, a glimpse of possibility preserved in notes, letters, and publications. As you linger in her presence, you feel the lineage of women whose brilliance was minimized or erased. Hypatia's intellect, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's courage, Ayrton's scientific innovation, Anne Lister's meticulous record-keeping, and Phyllis Wheatley's literary defiance, all converge here in Ada Lovelace's vision of a future she will never fully see. Her work embodies a continuum of extraordinary women, connected by the audacity to imagine, create, and resist erasure in societies that deny them full recognition. You walk with her along the Thames, the gas lamps reflecting off the water, feeling the paradox of existence constrained and limitless at once. Ada's mind is at once tethered by social expectation and soaring beyond temporal bounds, her insight capable of anticipating an era centuries ahead. The shadow of erasure presses around her, yet she leaves traces in formulas, notes, and letters, fragments of a genius that history will only later fully appreciate. You sense that her life, like those of the women before her, is both fragile and enduring. Recognition may be delayed, distorted, or partial, but her ideas persist, influencing generations who never knew her personally, shaping the trajectory of technology and imagination. Her presence is a reminder that intellectual courage, like all extraordinary courage, is often invisible until the world catches up, or until someone chooses to remember. As night falls, you leave the streets of London behind, carrying Ada Lovelace with you. Her vision of possibilities unrealized becomes part of the current guiding your journey through the lives of women who shaped history but were systematically minimized or ignored. You feel the continuity, the invisible threads connecting eras, disciplines, and courage. Each woman's life is a beacon, an assertion of existence and intellect that refuses to be erased. And so you move forward, the flickering lights of London fading into memory, toward the next extraordinary woman whose brilliance was marginalized, whose contributions have been hidden, and whose story demands your witness. Ada's insights guide you, a signal of possibility and perseverance, leading you into the next chapter of history, where audacity, intellect, and courage persist in defiance of oblivion. You leave the gas-lit streets of London behind and step into the marble halls of 16th century France, the air scented with wax, incense, and the faint sweetness of perfumes designed to impress and intimidate. The palace of the Valois dynasty rises before you, glittering and cold, corridors echoing with whispered intrigues and the clatter of courtiers' shoes. Here you encounter Catherine de' Medici, a woman whose political acumen and maneuvering once controlled the fate of nations, yet whose legacy has been reduced to scandal and superstition by history. You see her in the council chambers, robes flowing, jewels subdued but deliberate, her posture composed, eyes calculating every glance and gesture. She listens to advisors, weighs arguments, anticipates threats, and directs strategy with the precision of a master tactician. You feel the subtle tension in her presence, a queen navigating a court rife with faction, rebellion, and religious strife, all while contending with a society eager to portray her as manipulative, exotic, or irrational simply because she wields power as a woman. You follow her as she manages crises, the fragile alliances between Catholic and Protestant factions, the delicate negotiations with foreign powers, and the ever-present threat of civil unrest. Catherine's decisions are deliberate, often sacrificing immediate popularity for long-term stability, yet history has chosen to portray her as capricious or malevolent. You sense the frustration she must feel knowing that her intellect and strategy are ignored, minimized, or reframed by chroniclers whose biases seek to distort her actions. Her influence is subtle but pervasive. You notice the way she places ministers, arranges marriages, and orchestrates alliances, weaving a network of control that stabilizes a kingdom threatened on all sides. Every move is calculated to preserve both her family and her state, yet contemporaries and historians alike reduce her to the figure of a sinister puppet master or the symbol of courtly excess. You feel the irony. Her brilliance, her careful balancing of power, and her understanding of statecraft are dismissed precisely because they were executed by a woman in a patriarchal society. You walk with her through the palace gardens, the fountains glittering in the sunlight, the labyrinthine paths a mirror of the court's intrigue. She is both ruler and tactician, navigating rumor, loyalty, and treachery with the same precision she applies to policy. You notice her attention to detail. Every arrangement of the court, every correspondence, every public appearance is orchestrated to convey authority, to influence perception, to stabilize a fragile monarchy. Yet this skill, so necessary to survival, has been repeatedly misconstrued or ignored in historical memory. Her patronage extends beyond politics. You observe her commissioning artists, architects, and musicians, shaping the culture of France in ways subtle yet enduring. Yet these contributions, like her political successes, are often overshadowed by her vilification. You feel the weight of centuries pressing against her reputation, the persistent erasure of her achievements by chroniclers eager to tell stories of scandal rather than of strategy, of personal indulgence rather than public genius. Catherine is acutely aware of her precarious position. Every misstep, every display of weakness could be exploited, yet she acts with deliberation, foresight, and resilience. You feel the quiet defiance in her navigation of a male-dominated sphere, the assertion of authority in a world eager to ignore her wisdom. Her power is both visible and invisible. The mechanisms she controls are subtle, almost imperceptible, yet their effects shape the course of nations. You see her responding to rebellion, advising her sons, negotiating treaties, and mediating disputes. Each action is evidence of extraordinary skill, yet history remembers her more for her alleged ruthlessness than for her strategic brilliance. You sense the dissonance, the ongoing erasure, and yet you also feel the strength that allowed her to wield influence so effectively despite societal constraints. Her life demonstrates the intersection of intellect, strategy, and resilience, qualities that women across eras share, yet are denied recognition for in real time. As dusk falls over the palace, shadows stretching across the courtyard, you step outside with her and witness her contemplation of legacy. Catherine de' Medici understands that her actions will be reframed, misunderstood, or vilified by those who write history. Yet she persists, shaping policy, culture, and society with a calculated grace that endures in subtle ways, even if her genius is obscured by prejudice. You feel the continuum of brilliance connecting her to Hypatia, Sophonisba, Zenobia, Jean Barrett, Ayrton, Anne Lister, Phyllis Wheatley, and Ada Lovelace. Women whose intellect and courage have been minimized or erased, yet whose influence continues through time. Walking through the echoing corridors, you sense the stakes of survival and recognition, the delicate balance between power and perception, and the quiet defiance that defines Catherine's life. You realize that her story, like those of the women before her, exists both in the visible record and in the spaces where history has chosen to look away. Her mastery of strategy, culture, and diplomacy leaves traces that can only be fully appreciated when someone chooses to see them beyond the veil of bias. As night settles over the palace, the gardens dark and fountains silent, you leave Catherine de' Medici behind, carrying the presence of a woman who wielded power with intelligence and subtlety, whose story was obscured by the lenses of fear, prejudice, and gendered assumptions. She becomes part of the hidden thread of memory you are tracing, a guide to understanding how extraordinary women shape history even when the world is unwilling to acknowledge them fully. And so you continue your journey, moving forward through time and space, following the continuum of courage, intellect, and defiance against erasure. Catherine de' Medici is a reminder that strategic brilliance, political insight, and cultural influence can persist even in the shadows, and that your witnessing ensures these legacies endure. You leave the marble corridors of Catherine de' Medici behind, stepping into the jagged cliffs and storm-lashed shores of 14th century Brittany. The wind carries salt and the spray of the sea, tangy and sharp, whipping your hair across your face. Here, amid fortresses perched on rocky promontories and the distant roar of crashing waves, you encounter Jeanne de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany, a woman whose vengeance and audacity made her legend in her time, yet whose story was largely obscured by history's selective memory. You see her standing on the deck of a ship she has commandeered, black sails catching the wind like the wings of a predatory bird. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scan the horizon. You feel the fury and determination coiled in her frame, a woman whose husband was executed by political rivals, whose estate was seized, whose family threatened, yet who refused to surrender to grief. Jeanne transforms her rage into action, taking up arms against those who wronged her, navigating both the literal and political seas with precision and courage. You follow her across the waves, the salt spray stinging your skin, as she commands her fleet with authority that terrifies enemies and inspires allies. Every maneuver is deliberate, every raid calculated to punish betrayal and protect those loyal to her. You sense the paradox in her existence, a woman wielding power and violence in a society determined to confine women to domesticity. History would reduce her to myth, a pirate legend, or a footnote, ignoring the strategic mind and political acumen that guided her actions. Jeanne's cunning is evident in every engagement. You watch her anticipate enemy movements, plot ambushes, and manage resources with the acumen of a seasoned general. Her crew, loyal to her leadership and vision, respects her not merely for the ferocity of her vengeance, but for her insight, fairness, and ability to maintain order in chaos. You feel the weight of her intelligence, the careful balance she maintains between fear and loyalty, and the strategic brilliance that history often conflates with romanticized legend. You step into her private moments, when she pores over maps and charts, planning the next voyage, calculating wind, tides, and supply lines with meticulous care. Each decision is an assertion of agency, a refusal to allow grief and injustice to define her passively. You sense the extraordinary courage required to live publicly as a warrior in a world that considers such audacity unnatural for women. Yet Jean embraces this identity fully, shaping not only her destiny, but also the perception of what women can accomplish in defiance of societal constraints. Her story intertwines personal vengeance and political maneuvering. You follow her correspondence, coded messages, and alliances, realizing that Jean de Clison's effectiveness lies as much in diplomacy and intelligence as in sword and cannon. You feel the subtle genius in her strategy. Every act of piracy, every raid, is both retribution and message, signaling to her enemies and allies alike that she is neither to be underestimated nor confined. Yet the chroniclers of history would emphasize the drama, the sensational, the violent, rather than the intelligence, courage, and calculated resistance inherent in her actions. You walk with her along cliffs, feeling the Atlantic wind whip around you, and notice the duality of her existence. She is at once feared and admired, marginalized and celebrated, constrained by her era yet breaking boundaries it sought to enforce. You feel the continuum of audacity connecting her to the extraordinary women you have met. Hypatia's intellect, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's endurance, Ayrton's innovation, Anne Lister's meticulous record-keeping, Wheatley's literary defiance, Ada Lovelace's visionary genius, Catherine de Medici's political cunning, and now Jean de Clison's strategic and martial courage. Her legacy is encoded in legend, in whispers of black sails and relentless pursuit, yet the fullness of her story, her intelligence, her agency, her command, is often muted by the romance of piracy. You sense the tension between perception and reality, the distortion of historical memory, and the quiet insistence of truth waiting to be reclaimed. Every raid, every fleet maneuver, every calculated attack is a testament to the capacity of women to wield power decisively, even when society seeks to erase them. As dusk falls and the cliffs darken, you step off the deck with her, the roar of the Atlantic, a reminder of the risk she embraced. You carry with you the image of a woman who turned tragedy into strategy, grief into agency, and defiance into enduring legacy. Jean de Clison is a marker in the tapestry of hidden histories, a signal that extraordinary courage often exists in the margins, and that witness, your witness, is essential to preserving it. And so you move forward, leaving the cliffs and waves behind, following the invisible threads that connect audacious, intelligent, and extraordinary women across centuries. Jean's presence reinforces the continuum of resistance, brilliance, and defiance, reminding you that history has always been a battlefield for memory, and that the stories you carry forward are themselves acts of justice, restoration, and acknowledgement. You leave the storm-lashed cliffs of Brittany behind, crossing the churning seas to the rugged coastline of Lyme Regis, where the gulls wheel above jagged rocks and the waves crash with relentless rhythm. Here, amid the wind and salt, you encounter Mary Anning, a woman whose hands unearthed the ancient bones of creatures long extinct, yet whose contributions to paleontology would be minimized, her name largely absent from the annals of science. You follow her along the shoreline, hammer and chisel in hand, eyes sharp for the glint of fossilized remnants buried in cliffside shale. She moves with a precision born of practice and intuition, understanding the delicate balance between force and preservation. You feel the weight of centuries pressing against her, for she is a woman of intellect and skill in an era when scientific authority is granted almost exclusively to men. Every fossil she uncovers is both a discovery and a subtle act of defiance, a challenge to the structures that seek to deny her recognition. Her knowledge is encyclopedic. You watch as she examines each specimen, noting its structure, orientation, and potential significance. She sketches meticulously, records measurements with accuracy, and preserves her findings with care, fully aware that her work may be published under the names of male patrons or referenced without attribution. You feel the quiet frustration and determination in her, the tension between contribution and erasure, and the courage it takes to continue nonetheless. You walk with her through the layers of rock and sediment, feeling the physical exertion alongside the intellectual labor. Mary Anning is not merely a fossil collector. She is a scientist, a natural historian, a pioneer in understanding Earth's deep past. Yet the societal lenses of her era obscure the significance of her labor. Geologists, paleontologists, and academics may cite her specimens, but her name is often omitted, her presence in the scientific dialogue reduced to a whisper. You sense the injustice of history's selective memory pressing against every layer of shale she excavates. Her discoveries are staggering. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and other prehistoric marvels that reshape understanding of life on Earth. You feel the thrill of witnessing her realization, the spark of recognition that these fossils are not merely curiosities, but evidence of a history far older than human memory. And yet, you also feel the sting of inequity, for the men who interpret her findings receive accolades while she is relegated to the margins, a footnote in a story she helped write. Mary's brilliance extends beyond mere collection. She interprets, theorizes, and connects, understanding relationships among species, structures, and the fossil record with intuition and insight. You walk beside her as she explains anatomical details, contextualizes her finds, and debates with visiting scholars who underestimate her knowledge, assuming that gender or class limits her capacity. You feel the quiet defiance in her responses, the persistence of intellect despite societal dismissal, and the courage required to assert authority in a space not meant for her. You linger with her on the cliffs at dawn, the sunlight spilling across the rocks, illuminating bones that tell stories older than empires. You sense the parallel between her life and those of the women who preceded her. Hypatia's intellect, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's endurance, Ayrton's innovation, Anne Lister's meticulous record-keeping, Phyllis Wheatley's literary defiance, Ada Lovelace's visionary genius, Catherine de Medici's political cunning, and Jean de Clison's audacious courage. Anning's contributions continue this thread. Women whose brilliance has often been denied acknowledgement but persists through the evidence they leave behind. As the tide ebbs and the waves retreat, you feel the resonance of her story. Every fossil is a message across time, a testimony to her skill, observation, and insight. Mary Anning's persistence ensures that history cannot fully ignore her, though it may obscure or diminish her role. You sense that her legacy is embedded not only in the discoveries themselves, but in the inspiration she provides to future generations, a beacon of resilience, curiosity, and dedication to knowledge against the odds. You step away from the cliffs with her, carrying the imprint of a woman whose intellect shaped the understanding of the natural world, whose labor was critical yet often invisible, and whose courage ensures that the continuum of extraordinary women continues to grow. Mary Anning's presence reinforces the pattern you have witnessed across time. Talent, vision, and persistence exist independently of recognition, and memory itself becomes an act of resistance against erasure. And so you move forward, leaving the fossil-strewn cliffs behind, tracing the hidden currents of knowledge, courage, and resilience that connect extraordinary women across centuries. Mary Anning is a reminder that intellect, discovery, and daring do not require permission, and that the act of witnessing these legacies ensures their endurance beyond the limitations of historical bias. You leave the windswept cliffs of Lyme Regis behind and step into the candle-lit studios of 17th century Rome, where the scent of oil paint, turpentine, and chalk fills the air. Here, amidst the shadows of grand palaces and the echoes of church choirs, you encounter Artemisia Gentileschi, a painter whose talent and vision rivaled any of her male contemporaries, yet whose legacy has been filtered through scandal and the prejudices of a patriarchal society. You see her at work, brush in hand, poised before a canvas that commands attention with its sheer scale and intensity. Figures twist and turn in dramatic poses, colors vibrant, shadows deep, the light highlighting both suffering and triumph. Her skill is undeniable, every stroke deliberate, every expression captured with emotional depth that speaks of both technical mastery and lived experience. You feel the intensity in her presence, a woman asserting authority in a field dominated by men who questioned her right to practice, let alone excel. You follow her as she navigates commissions from patrons, negotiating contracts and payments in a society that often views women as incapable of professionalism or independence. Each negotiation is a battle, each signed contract an assertion of agency in a world prepared to dismiss her capabilities. You sense the duality of her existence, celebrated for her skill, yet scrutinized and often judged for her gender, for daring to step into spaces from which women are traditionally excluded. Her life is marked by personal trauma, yet she channels experience into artistic power. You witness her renderings of biblical heroines, like Judith beheading Holofernes, capturing raw emotion and strength, not simply as illustration but as declaration. Every canvas becomes a voice, a resistance, a refusal to be silenced or diminished. You feel the courage it takes to transform suffering into art, to confront societal bias with brush and pigment rather than retreating into invisibility. You walk with her through the crowded studios and galleries of Rome, observing the subtle interplay between recognition and erasure. Critics admire technique yet question authority, acknowledge beauty yet dismiss intellect. Artemisia's work challenges expectations, depicting women as active agents rather than passive subjects, asserting complexity in both narrative and execution. You sense the frustration and resilience intertwined in every creation, the persistence required to maintain a career in the face of pervasive doubt. You linger beside her as she studies anatomy, lighting, and perspective, seeking perfection in every detail. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the expectation that she conform to male standards, the threat of historical minimization, the risk that future generations will remember scandal before genius. And yet she persists, her paintings an enduring testimony to her vision, courage, and skill. Artemisia's patrons span courts, churches, and private collections, yet her name is often footnoted or overshadowed by men. You notice how her work embodies both defiance and pedagogy. She teaches through her paintings, illustrating that women can convey both intellectual depth and emotional complexity, that mastery is not defined by gender. Every composition, every chiaroscuro, every expression is a testament to the continuity of extraordinary women whose influence persists despite societal constraints. You step outside her studio as dusk falls, the Roman streets bathed in golden light, and feel the resonance of her legacy. Artemisia Gentileschi is part of a chain stretching back through time. Hypatia's intellect, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's endurance, Ayrton's innovation, Anne Lister's meticulous record-keeping, Wheatley's literary defiance, Lovelace's visionary genius, Catherine de' Medici's political cunning, Jean de Clisson's audacious courage, Mary Anning's scientific insight, and now Artemisia's artistic brilliance. Each woman's life is a note in the chorus of resistance against historical erasure, a signal of persistence that refuses silence. As night deepens over Rome, the shadows long and soft, you leave the studio behind, carrying with you the presence of a woman whose genius transformed paint into power, whose courage and creativity demand recognition, and whose story, though once marginalized, continues to inspire. Artemisia Gentileschi is both testament and guide, reminding you that extraordinary women shape the world even when society attempts to obscure their contributions. And so you continue, moving forward through time and across continents, tracing the hidden currents of courage, intellect, and audacity that connect women across history. Her life reinforces the lesson that brilliance often exists in the margins, that recognition may be delayed, and that your act of witnessing is itself an act of preservation. You leave the sun-dappled streets and studios of Rome behind and traverse the Mediterranean, stepping into the bustling city of Alexandria. The air is thick with the scent of papyrus, the warm hum of merchants' voices, and the faint tang of salt from the harbor. Here, in a city known for knowledge, learning, and the circulation of ideas, you encounter Hypatia, the philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer whose intellect shone in an era increasingly hostile to female authority. You find her in the library of Alexandria, or what remains of its scholarly precincts, a room filled with scrolls, codices, instruments, and diagrams. The faint smell of ink and oil from lamps hangs in the air, and you feel the weight of centuries pressing upon the shelves, filled with human thought. Hypatia stands at a table strewn with scrolls, pointing to geometric diagrams, her voice calm yet forceful as she explains the principles of conic sections, the relationship of celestial bodies, and the elegance of mathematical proof. You feel her presence not as a figure confined to the past, but as a living intellect, radiant with curiosity and authority. She moves with purpose among students and colleagues, some men, some women, all drawn to her wisdom. You notice the way they listen, rapt and respectful, the deference earned not through title or force, but through undeniable mastery of knowledge. Hypatia is a teacher whose brilliance extends beyond content. She models intellectual rigor, ethical reasoning, and moral courage, showing that learning is inseparable from character. You feel the tension inherent in her position, a woman commanding authority in a patriarchal society that increasingly fears the power of independent thought. Her contributions are multifaceted. You follow her hands as she works with astrolabes, sundials, and other instruments designed to chart the heavens, measure time, and predict celestial events. You feel the precision of her mind, the beauty in her calculations, the artistry in her geometric proofs. Hypatia does not merely observe the universe, she interprets it, connecting mathematics, philosophy, and ethics into a coherent worldview. You sense the enormity of her intellect, the interweaving of disciplines, and the audacity of her insight in a society that presumes women's minds to be subordinate. You witness her engaging in philosophical debate, discussing Plato, Aristotle, and Neoplatonist thought with clarity and nuance. Her students challenge her, and she challenges them in return, cultivating reasoning that is rigorous, disciplined, and respectful of evidence. You sense that Hypatia's life is an exercise in the pursuit of truth, in resistance to ignorance, and in the demonstration that intellect cannot be constrained by gender. Yet the world outside her classroom is growing hostile. Religious and political tensions mount, factions form, and the rising tide of intolerance threatens both knowledge and those who guard it. Walking with her through the Agora, you feel the presence of Alexandria as a crossroads of commerce, ideas, and conflict. Hypatia's authority, grounded in intellect and moral integrity, is increasingly perceived as threatening by those who seek to consolidate power through dogma. You feel the precariousness of her position, a brilliant woman standing as a beacon of reason amid the gathering storm of societal upheaval. Her calm demeanor masks the awareness that knowledge alone is not sufficient protection against envy, fear, and ideology. You linger as she teaches a small group in her private study, explaining the mechanics of the celestial spheres, the harmony of mathematics, and the ethical responsibilities of the learned. Her approach is inclusive, methodical, and unrelenting in its pursuit of clarity. You sense the legacy she seeks to leave, not merely the transmission of knowledge, but the cultivation of critical thinking and moral courage in those who will outlive her. Her life is both example and instruction, a template for intellectual integrity and resistance against ignorance. Yet the threat grows. Political and religious factions view her influence with suspicion, seeing the presence of a woman of intellect as dangerous to their authority. You feel the tension rise, the sense of impending violence that historians will later describe with a brevity that masks its horror. Hypatia's erasure is not accidental, it is deliberate, a violent act intended to remove a woman whose mind and moral authority cannot be controlled. Her murder, brutal and public, is meant to silence both her voice and the broader potential for women to occupy spheres of power. You are with her in her final moments, the sounds of a city teetering on chaos surrounding you. You feel the courage it takes to confront death without renunciation, to stand as an emblem of intellect and integrity, even as the forces of ignorance close in. Hypatia speaks calmly, guiding her students with words of reason and encouragement, leaving a final testament that the pursuit of knowledge transcends the fear and cruelty of human institutions. You sense the weight of her legacy, indelible despite the attempt to obliterate it. Afterward, you walk through the ruins where she taught, where the scrolls she preserved were destroyed, and feel the currents of erasure pressing around her story. Yet her ideas persist in fragments, in mathematical treatises, in philosophical commentaries, and in the influence upon her students who carry her teachings forward. You sense the continuity of extraordinary women whose intellectual courage challenges the boundaries of their societies, and whose presence endures, even when history attempts to remove it. Hypatia's life resonates across time, linking her to Sophonisba Anguissola's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's exploration, Ayrton's scientific innovation, Anne Lister's documentation, Wheatley's literary voice, Lovelace's visionary calculations, Catherine de Medici's political strategies, Jean de Clisson's audacity, Mary Anning's scientific insight, and Artemisia Gentilesca's artistic mastery. Each woman asserts agency, intellect, and creativity, often against overwhelming social constraints, and Hypatia is the archetype of this continuum: philosopher, scientist, teacher, and moral exemplar. You leave the ruins of Alexandria with her memory imprinted on your consciousness, carrying the essence of courage, intellect, and resistance to erasure across time. You understand that the story of Hypatia is a reminder that history's silences are not absolute, that the witness of those who come after her is a vital force in preserving her legacy, and that the continuum of extraordinary women persists as long as their stories are remembered, studied, and retold. As the sun sets over the Mediterranean, you feel the threads connecting all the women you have encountered, an unbroken chain of intellect, courage, and defiance. Hypatia is a beacon, a guide, a symbol of resistance, showing that the pursuit of knowledge, the insistence on moral and intellectual integrity, and the courage to occupy spaces denied by society are acts that echo through the centuries. And so you continue your journey, moving forward through time and memory, tracing the hidden currents of influence, resilience, and brilliance that link extraordinary women across epochs. Hypatia's presence reinforces the lesson that intellect and courage endure, that erasure can never fully obliterate genius, and that your act of witness ensures the survival of a legacy that might otherwise have been lost to the tides of history. You leave the sun-soaked streets and libraries of Alexandria behind and journey across the Atlantic to the bustling ports of 18th century France. The air is thick with salt from the harbor, tar from the ships, and the heavy smell of ink from naval offices. Amid this environment of exploration and maritime ambition, You encounter Jean Barrett, a woman whose courage and ingenuity allowed her to circumnavigate the globe, yet whose story was nearly erased by the conventions of her time. You first meet her as she boards a ship bound for distant oceans, disguised as a man, her hair cropped and her clothing transformed to conceal her gender. You feel the audacity coursing through her veins, the understanding that this voyage is both her chance at freedom and a rebellion against every limit imposed by society. She steps onto the deck, balancing the weight of her secret with the weight of her ambition, knowing that discovery, survival, and agency are all contingent upon her cleverness and perseverance. You follow her across decks bustling with sailors, officers, and naturalists, feeling the tension of every glance, every question, every potential exposure. Jean is not merely hiding. She is navigating a male-dominated environment, performing an identity that protects her while allowing her to participate in scientific exploration. You feel the delicate balance she maintains, the constant calculation of risk, and the quiet defiance that fuels her journey. Her knowledge is extraordinary. You watch as she assists botanist Philibert Commerson, cataloging plants, observing ecosystems, and recording data with a precision and insight that surpasses many formally trained men aboard. She is both student and contributor, learner and teacher, pushing the boundaries of what women are allowed to do while simultaneously excelling within those self-imposed constraints. You sense the revolutionary nature of her contributions, a woman participating fully in global exploration despite societal erasure. You walk beside her through tropical islands, dense forests, and windswept coasts, feeling her exhilaration at encountering species never seen in Europe. Each plant she identifies, each specimen she preserves, is an act of assertion, a claim to competence, intellect, and the right to inhabit spaces denied to her gender. You see the meticulous care with which she documents morphology, ecology, and habitat, the careful sketches and written observations that demonstrate both artistry and scientific rigor. Yet danger looms constantly. Jean must maintain her disguise, navigate the prejudices of her shipmates, and respond to the unpredictable elements of the ocean. You sense the duality of her existence, public invisibility and private mastery, vulnerability and resilience. Her courage is not only physical but intellectual, a refusal to allow identity or circumstance to limit the scope of her life and work. Her interactions with Commerson are both professional and collaborative. You notice the mutual respect and understanding between them, the way her observations inform his research, the subtle recognition of her insight despite the social conventions that would have otherwise silenced her. You feel the tension of historical injustice. Much of the credit for discoveries she directly influenced would historically be attributed to him, while her role remained obscured. Across oceans and continents, you accompany her through storms and doldrums, through lush islands and remote coasts. You feel her perseverance in the face of illness, fatigue, and suspicion. Jean Barrett embodies resilience not only as a woman surviving in hostile environments, but as a thinker, observer, and recorder whose intellect is constantly engaged, always questioning, always noting. Each day is both labor and liberation, each observation a testament to the indomitable spirit of women whose contributions have been minimized. As the voyage unfolds, you sense her growing mastery of navigation, observation, and scientific methodology. She learns to read the winds, anticipate the behavior of currents, and interpret the complex ecosystems she encounters. Every successful identification, every preserved specimen, is an act of claiming a place in history that society sought to deny her. Yet, in her quiet, persistent work, she transcends societal constraints, leaving a legacy that will only later be fully appreciated. You witness moments of triumph, the successful collection of rare plants, the admiration of a few who recognize her skill, and the completion of the circumnavigation itself, a feat achieved by few men and even fewer women. Yet you also witness the persistent threat of erasure. Historians will later mention her name only in footnotes, often emphasizing disguise and deception over intellect, perseverance, and scientific contribution. You feel the injustice, yet also the inevitability of her influence persisting in ways subtle and enduring. You walk with her on distant islands at sunset, the sky ablaze with orange and violet, the sea shimmering with light. You feel the continuity of courage and innovation linking her to the extraordinary women you have met. Hypatia's intellect, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Ayrton's innovation, Anne Lister's meticulous record-keeping, Wheatley's literary defiance, Lovelace's visionary calculations, Catherine de' Medici's political strategies, Jean de Clisson's audacious courage, Mary Anning's scientific insight, Artemisia Gentilesca's artistic brilliance. Jean Barrett's contribution is different yet intimately connected. The courage to explore, to claim intellectual authority, and to leave traces of knowledge that transcend immediate recognition. As night falls over the ocean, you feel the quiet enormity of her achievement. She has journeyed farther, observed more, and endured greater challenges than history initially acknowledges. Every note she wrote, every specimen she preserved, and every mile she navigated contributes to a continuum of extraordinary women whose intellect and bravery shaped the world in ways often invisible to contemporary chroniclers. You sense that witness is essential. Without it, her legacy, like so many others, risks fading into the background, obscured by societal bias and historical neglect. You step onto the deck for the final night of the voyage, feeling the cool spray of the ocean, the gentle sway of the ship, and the profound resilience of a woman whose life defied conventions, whose courage and intellect charted new courses, and whose story demands remembrance. Jean Barrett is a reminder that history's silences are deliberate yet not absolute, that contributions persist even when recognition is delayed, and that the continuity of extraordinary women is a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and audacity. And so you continue your journey, leaving the vast oceans and distant shores behind, tracing the hidden threads that link extraordinary women across time. Jean Barrett's courage, intellect, and determination are inscribed in memory, a beacon guiding your path through the intertwined narratives of resilience, creativity, and defiance. Her presence reinforces a lesson that echoes across centuries. Brilliance cannot be contained by social norms, courage cannot be silenced by prejudice, and witnessing is the act that ensures these legacies endure. You leave the boundless oceans behind and return to the smoky streets and gas-lit laboratories of late 19th century London. The air is thick with the scent of coal, oil, and chemicals, a haze of industry that masks the brilliance simmering within its workshops. Here, amid the clamor of machines and the chatter of men, you encounter Hertha Ayrton, an engineer, mathematician, and inventor whose genius illuminated the world in ways few recognized at the time. A woman whose accomplishments were systematically minimized because of the simple audacity of her intellect. You watch her at her bench, a table cluttered with papers, experimental apparatus, wires, and coils. Her hands move with precision and authority, adjusting currents, observing arcs of electricity, testing the limits of light and sound. Ayrton is investigating the electric arc and developing the first practical improvements to gas illumination, her mind dancing across both theory and application, theory and experimentation in perfect harmony. You feel the meticulous rigor, the thrill of discovery, and the quiet defiance that informs every movement she makes. A woman asserting mastery over physical laws in a society that insists her place is not in laboratories but in parlors. You follow her through meetings of learned societies, where she presents her findings to men who struggle to reconcile brilliance with gender. You feel the tension in every handshake, every nod of recognition tempered by disbelief or condescension. Some attempt to diminish her authority, to frame her observations as anomalous or derivative. Yet Hertha persists, armed with data, calculations, and experiments that cannot be refuted. You sense the courage required to insist upon truth and precision in spaces designed to exclude her, the daily negotiation between intellect and prejudice. Her contributions are both practical and theoretical. You linger as she demonstrates the principles of electric arcs, the behavior of ripples in sand, her experiments in fluid dynamics and wave motion, and her work in inventing the Ayrton fan to alleviate the choking smoke of factories. You feel the sweep of her ingenuity, a mind capable of seeing solutions before others recognize problems, and creating innovations that bridge abstract theory and immediate, real-world utility. Every invention is a testament to persistence, observation, and resilience in the face of skepticism. You walk with her through the streets of London, past factories and workshops, feeling the tangible impact of her work on society. The smoke that once choked workers and filled homes begins to dissipate thanks to the cleverness of one mind, yet few acknowledge her name. You sense the bitterness of historical erasure, the frustration of contribution unrecognized, and yet also the triumph of accomplishment visible in light, airflow, and the improved conditions of ordinary lives. Her influence is quiet but enduring. Her struggle is not only technical but social. You observe the barriers she confronts in joining professional societies, attending scientific meetings, and publishing her research. You feel the weight of systemic gender bias pressing upon every assertion she makes, every paper she submits, every lecture she delivers. Yet Hertha responds with determination, ensuring her voice is heard, her work validated by evidence, and her authority recognized by those willing to see past the prejudices of the time. You linger in her workshop as she performs meticulous experiments, calculating the behavior of light arcs across different conditions. You sense her profound understanding of physics, the elegance of her mathematics, and the precision of her methodology. Every measurement, every graph, every line of calculation is an act of defiance and affirmation, asserting that intelligence and ingenuity do not depend upon gender. You feel her legacy as a bridge between invention, scientific theory, and social transformation, a reminder that women's contributions to knowledge often go unseen but resonate nonetheless. Her presence is the culmination of the threads you have followed across centuries. Hypatia's philosophical rigor, Sophonisba's artistry, Zenobia's leadership, Jean Barrett's courage and resourcefulness, Anne Lister's meticulous documentation, Phyllis Wheatley's literary defiance, Ada Lovelace's visionary calculations, Catherine de Medici's political strategy, Jean de Clisson's audacity, Mary Anning's scientific insight, and Artemisia Gentileschi's artistic brilliance. Hertha Ayrton represents a final node in this constellation, a woman whose intellect transforms both abstract understanding and practical life, whose perseverance breaks barriers, and whose story must be remembered to honor the continuum of extraordinary women who shaped history. You watch her publish her papers, present her findings, and mentor younger women in science. You feel the quiet revolution inherent in her work. She not only advances knowledge, but demonstrates by example that women are capable of equal, even exceptional, scientific accomplishment. Every challenge she overcomes, every skeptical gaze she faces, every validation she secures is a victory against centuries of erasure, a beacon signaling that brilliance cannot be permanently hidden. As night falls over London, you leave the laboratory with Hertha Ayrton, walking through streets illuminated by the very principles she helped refine. You feel the invisible threads connecting her life to those of all the extraordinary women you have encountered, a tapestry woven from intellect, courage, creativity, and resilience. You understand that the stories of women like her are not isolated. They are part of a broader, persistent pattern. Societies attempt to diminish their influence. History threatens to forget them. Yet their impact endures across disciplines, generations, and continents. Hertha's innovations, her published research, her lectures, and her unwavering pursuit of truth become more than personal achievements. They are collective victories. You feel the weight of witnessing. Every woman whose life has been minimized or misrepresented relies upon someone to preserve, recount, and honor her contributions. By following this continuum, you become part of the ongoing reclamation of memory, ensuring that genius, courage, and creativity are recognized, even when social and historical forces attempt to erase them. You pause, reflecting on the lives you have traversed. The mathematician, the poet, the politician, the pirate, the fossil hunter, the painter, the explorer, and now the engineer. You feel the resonance of their experiences, the shared qualities of resilience, brilliance, and audacity. Each life, remarkable in its own domain, is linked by the persistence of women who refused invisibility, who refused the erasure of their intellect, courage, and creativity. As the night deepens and the streets of London fall quiet, you sense the immense continuum of history unfolding beneath your awareness. The lives of these women, Hypatia, Sophonisba, Zenobia, Jean Barrett, Ayrton, Anne Lister, Phyllis Wheatley, Ada Lovelace, Catherine de Medici, Jean de Clisson, Mary Anning, Artemisia Gentileschi, and now Hertha Ayrton, create a lineage of extraordinary courage and intellect. Their stories, though often obscured, persist in memory, in the traces of their work, and in the inspiration they provide to generations yet to come. You understand, finally, that this journey is not merely a recounting of forgotten achievements. It is an act of reclamation, a weaving together of disparate lives into a cohesive narrative of resilience. The witnessing itself is a form of resistance, preserving the voices that history attempted to silence and asserting the undeniable presence of women in shaping the course of human civilization. And so you move forward, carrying with you the weight and brilliance of countless lives, the threads of intellect, courage, creativity, and determination stretching across time. Hertha Ayrton becomes both a symbol and a guide, the culmination of a narrative that spans centuries, disciplines, and continents. Through her, you understand that history is not static, that memory is malleable, and that the act of remembrance is itself revolutionary. As the first light of dawn glimmers on the Thames, you feel the continuity of extraordinary women, their influence and brilliance persisting despite the obstacles imposed by society. You are the witness, the carrier of legacy, the link that ensures that their stories endure. Every discovery, every creation, every act of defiance against erasure lives on, illuminating the path for future generations. You walk away from London's quiet streets, the faint hum of awakening city life beneath your feet, knowing that the lives you have traversed are interconnected, a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and perseverance. Extraordinary women, long minimized or forgotten, now exist vividly in your consciousness, their presence a living argument against historical invisibility. You step back from the centuries you have traversed, from the deserts, oceans, forests, and cities that held the lives of women whose brilliance was too often obscured. The air around you seems lighter now, yet it carries the weight of memory, the echoes of voices that history tried to silence. You feel the pulse of intellect and courage vibrating through time. Hypatia teaching in Alexandria, Sophonisba painting in Cremona, Zenobia strategizing in Palmyra, Jean Barrett circling the globe, Hertha Ayrton illuminating London, each a beacon in her own domain. And yet, what strikes you most is the pattern, the continuity. Across eras and continents, despite societies determined to minimize their impact, these women share something more than talent or intellect. They share courage. The courage to act, to think, to speak, to create, to explore, to lead, even when recognition was withheld, even when danger loomed. You realize that this courage, like a silent river, runs beneath the surface of history, shaping outcomes, influencing generations, and persisting in ways both visible and invisible. You sense how intimately their lives are connected, not by friendship or proximity, but by the shared defiance of erasure. Every painting, calculation, discovery, political decision, voyage, and invention is a thread weaving together a tapestry of resilience. And standing amidst this tapestry, you feel its texture, strong, intricate, luminous, and enduring. The legacy of extraordinary women is not merely in what they achieved. It is in the proof that brilliance and courage do not yield to societal constraints. In the quiet of this moment, you reflect on what it means to witness. To remember is to resist. To tell their stories is to honor their struggle, to give voice to acts of genius and defiance that might otherwise dissolve into obscurity. You recognize that memory itself is a kind of power, a reclamation, a refusal to allow history to erase what it fears or misunderstands. Every narrative you carry forward reinforces the continuum, ensuring that the echoes of Hypatia, Sophonisba, Zenobia, Jean Barrett, Hertha Ayrton, and countless others resonate with clarity and truth. You feel the lingering presence of all the women you have walked alongside. Their courage is contagious, their intellect radiant, their defiance inspiring. And as you stand at the edge of this journey, you realize that the story is not over. Their influence continues to ripple, intersecting with your own life and with the countless stories yet untold, waiting to be uncovered, remembered, and celebrated. So you step forward, carrying the light of their brilliance. Every choice you make, every story you tell, every act of curiosity, creation, and courage becomes part of the ongoing narrative. The continuum of extraordinary women persists, not as a relic of the past, but as a living, breathing force that shapes the present and inspires the future. And in this knowledge, you find both closure and awakening, a sense of completion for the journey you have witnessed, and the quiet, exhilarating recognition that the journey of remembrance, discovery, and celebration never truly ends. You exhale, feeling the weight and wonder of history settle gently around you, and you know without doubt that the extraordinary women of the past are never truly gone. They live in memory, in action, and in the spark of courage they ignite in those who follow.